Hi guys, welcome back, and today is Sunday, the 14th of August 2016. I'm going to talk about a slightly different subject to what my channel usually covers, but I found it interesting enough to do a bit of digging and present this information to you and see what your thoughts and opinions are, because I'll give you mine. So I'm going to start off with this lovely sign, Indoctrination Center Ahead. Now again, a lot of these stories fundamentally come from Zero Hedge, and this one is titled Generation Screwed Fights Back. This was published on August the 13th by Tyler Durden, submitted by Pietra Diekmeyer of Sprott Money. Now I'm just paraphrasing the article. The good news is that some millennials in Canada, of all places, are starting to fight. Quote, "We call ourselves Generation Screwed," end quote. Because governments are spending money but leaving the bills behind for the young to pay, says Gunn. Quote, "Apathy is our biggest challenge. Many youth are so burdened with the demands of getting a start in life, they are unaware of the lousy hand they are being dealt," end quote. The key driver of Generation Screwed's popularity is the country's rising national debt, which according to the organisation Debt Clock now exceeds $600 billion, and that doesn't include provincial and municipal obligations. Worse, according to Gunn, the federal government's 2016 budget projects $99 billion in new borrowing during the coming 4 years. So here's the national debt clock for the US dollar, approaching 19.5 trillion in debt total. The average per citizen is almost $60,000. And you can check this debt calculator out at usdebtclock.org, and you can have a look through all the aspects, which is quite a fascinating read. Going back to the article, the average US student debt is now $27,000, which equates to 1.2 trillion overall. Education is increasingly disconnected from reality and poorly adapted to the job market. Most students learn essentially nothing about money management. For example, one of the most important life skills. Upon graduation, students enter what Donald Trump calls, quote, "a rigged economy," end quote, where older workers are entitled to union, government, academic, and other jobs with benefits that are protected by a slew of credentialism strategies. The young get stuck with unpaid internships, work part-time, or do contract work. Now, I can vouch for a lot of people in the UK who are on contract work basis, simply because it's easy for the employer to get the workforce, and it's easy to lay them off when they don't need them without any union impact or redundancy having to be paid for no longer requiring them. So it's beneficial for the employer only. Given the poor financial, employment and educational circumstances, not surprisingly, more than half of 18 to 34-year-olds live with their parents, according to the Pew Research. Again, this is completely reflective in UK markets as well, and I'd guess most of Europe. No sympathy from governments. Gunn and Generation Screwed remain undeterred. This despite the long odds and tough opponents, particularly senior groups lined up against them in the United States. The powerful American Association of Retired People lobby group, for example, will stop at nothing to protect members' existing entitlements. The country's youth are an afterthought. Nor are millennials likely to get much sympathy from governments, which increasingly resemble hospital geriatric wards. The average age of the US congressman is 61. That of a Canadian senator is 65. The average age of the US Supreme Court justice will be 75 by the end of the current US presidential cycle. Quote, "I know the odds are long," end quote, says Gunn. Quote, "but changing mentalities is a slow process. We will keep focusing and doing it one person at a time, end quote. And that exact quote represents a lot of things also in what this channel is all about. And this channel is designed at spreading information, not only to people that are already aware of the extremely corrupt and fake, false world that it is that we find ourselves living in. People are not taught about money and fiat currencies and wealth, protection, and investing in your future. People have been taught the wrong strategies from the very beginning of their childhood indoctrination, which is called the schooling system, which many people believe educates our children into being intelligent adults in the future. But what you need to understand is that the education system is designed in a certain way to create a certain product at the other end. I feel that the longer you are in a quote education system is actually the longer you are in an indoctrinated system, and the truth of real education is hidden from you even longer. And I'll go on to talk about that more shortly. So I'm now going to flip over to something that was released last week, around the beginning of August, anyway, recently. More than a third of UK graduates regret attending university. Reports find graduates have just £150 spare each month after living costs, and half feel a degree has not helped their life path. Now I just want to talk about the parents' philosophy on what they tried to tell their children. And what do they say? They say, you need to go to school, you need to earn good grades, you need to have good grades to go to university, and then you need to have good grades at university to get a good job and to live well, etc., etc. But I've been finding out that this system no longer works because our parents were brought up in a different era to what the new children of today and teenagers and young adults are facing. The world is a very different, complex place to what it once was. And you can go back to a simple form of demographics when the baby boomer era were coming out of a desperately deprived war scenario, and many countries were ravaged of lots of things that we take for granted today. Now, it's a highly complex topic to discuss, but the mentalities that our parents try to distill onto the children of today is effectively useless in today's market. Now, I'll continue why shortly. So you've got college and university students who are all over the globe feeling the pinch and pressures of university. And not to mention, I'll slightly backtrack on this, you have children who are very young. I believe reading a story a few months ago about kids that are like 7, 8, 9 years old under huge amounts of pressures at school during mock exams and things to show that they're performing on target. And a lot of these kids are getting seriously ill and stressed, when in reality all they should be doing is, reading a few books, going out and playing and enjoying being a child, not put through these strenuous tests and constant tests that you're competing against other people to be the best and be better than everybody else, which can only result effectively in the long run in failure. So here's an image. Never confuse education with intelligence. You think about that. Just because somebody goes to a school or a university, does that make them intelligent? And if you're going to a university, do you believe you're more intelligent than somebody who hasn't? This was posted on the 29th of July 2016. A quarter of UK architecture students report mental health issues. More than a quarter of architectural students in the UK have reported mental health issues relating to their studies, with workload and debt among the leading causes, according to a new survey. 26% of respondents to the study survey by British magazine The Architect's Journal, AJ, said that they were being treated or had been treated for mental health issues related to their course. Another 26% said that they thought they would need to seek professional help in the future. Altogether, more than half of the students who responded reported concerns about mental health related to their course. The problem was more acute with female respondents, of whom almost a third had sought support for mental health issues compared to 26% of male respondents. So that's 1 in 4 or 1 in 3 of all architectural students seeking mental health issues because of the stress and money issues. This is crazy. It goes on to say, many of the respondents who had suffered from the mental health issues said that being expected to work long hours had contributed to the problem. The survey found that almost 1 in 3 students were working through the night on a regular basis as part of their studies. Others cited concerns around money, and 38% of students who responded to the survey said they expected to incur debts of between £30,000 and £50,000 during their studies. 1 in 10 said they thought they would owe more than £70,000 by the time they qualified, and 2/5 believed they would never be able to repay their loan. Under the current system, students in the UK study for at least 7 years to qualify as an architect, longer than most other professions. A bill that would allow universities to raise their fees above the current cap of £9,000 per year is currently passing through Parliament and could see debts increase significantly. So on a slight sidetrack from that, I was driving back from work one evening, and on the radio was this topic about student debt. And it was this young guy, I believe 22 or 23, something like that, and he did his first 2 years of the course, and he decided to take a year out in order to work and save some extra money to pay for his following year's tuition fees and things like that. During which time the year passed, and when he came back to applying to go back to finish off his final year, the fees had gone up dramatically more than he could afford. So he was unable to actually attend, even after working for the entire year to save up for the previous year's quote to attend that university. So he's just lost another whole year saving to not be able to finish off the degree for the price that it was the previous year. Which just makes you wonder why these people even want to attend something which is going to leave them in a significantly disadvantaged position with huge amounts of debt. And that all comes down to the indoctrination centre. People believe that by holding a university degree, that somehow all your problems are going to be solved, you're going to be employable, and you're going to get that dream job paying huge amounts of money. Fiat currency. However, today, that is not the case. You have a huge amount of university graduates leaving with their degrees, unable to find work in the sectors that they have degrees in. And they find themselves going into regular jobs that they would have just had if they never even went through this process in the first place. And I'm talking about working at the supermarkets. You'll have people stacking the shelves with degrees. You'll have people changing professions and becoming plumbers and carpenters and car salesmen. And they might have degrees in advertising or law or whatever form of degree you want to talk about. Now, obviously, I could have jumped down a rabbit hole here and brought up lots of information regarding all this, but to be honest, guys, that takes a lot of time digging about and finding the articles that give this form of information. But I promise you, you can find it out there. If you don't believe what it is that I'm saying, you just have to look it up and you'll see. Now, moving on, it's a lot of students coming out and complaining, saying to these government officials that we're students, we're not customers. We don't have the money to repay these loans. You keep increasing these rates. We just want to get an education. Now, they're blinded by the system. They still want to get their education. And that's what David Icke has got here in his quote. The student trap. Get them to pay a fortune for their own programming, then control them through debt for the rest of their lives. Now, you can control people by planting huge amounts of debt on them, which is unsustainable to pay back. We'll go on to that shortly as well. So you get them when they're young. These guys here have no idea what's ahead of them in their futures. I mean, they almost look depressed anyway, and they haven't even become a teenager yet. They're meant to be happy young children. Anyway, there is a fine line between education and indoctrination. You see all these guys, what's happened to the days of interacting with your teachers, other students, and you hear on the news, on the radios, and on other forms of media, the populations of today are spending so much time glued to their LCD screens, and that they're actually disconnected from reality. And if this picture does not look like programming to you, then you need to analyze the word programming. I found this image quite entertaining. You have all these university grads that have passed their courses, attained their degrees, and feel that they're obviously big players, intelligent, smart, and they're going to become wealthy in the future. Now, I wonder how many of these guys here smoking these Cubans are going to be in that situation today. Here's a quote from Ron Paul. They don't educate our kids, they indoctrinate our kids. It's a propaganda machine. And if you're listening to this and thinking, man, this is just a huge conspiracy ploy, then you probably have already turned off and gone on another video and started catching Pokemon. But if you are still here and you're listening, you need to think about education in a different way. You need to think about it in a more sinister style of governmental control. And if you don't think the government controls what your children are taught, then I want you to research the word government and find out the Latin meaning of that word, which breaks it down into two segments. You will be more than surprised with what you find. So we have these guys and girls coming out of university feeling that they have achieved what they need to achieve in order to go out and be successful in life. However, the days have changed from having state-sponsored education programs to now being debt-ridden programs that leave the individuals or the families with thousands and thousands in debt if your family is not wealthy enough to pay outright for the courses. It's like this guy is sitting on a rock. He's got his student loan in one paper, he's got his debt on his back, and is this really the way you want society to move forward? This cycle system of debt is unsustainable. You need to understand money, you need to understand debt, you need to understand compound interest of debt, and you need to understand likelihood of employment in your chosen fields. And you need to ask yourself, is this really what I want? I just want to help people to understand that what it is that they're doing through the university system, through the A-level system, you're going to be acquiring huge amounts of debt which you're not going to be able to pay off. And that is going to not only add to the increasing debt of society, but it's going to put a huge amount of pressure upon you for years to come when you finally understand what it is that you actually have strapped to your back. It's another cartoon illustration of the 20 and 30 somethings leaving university with a 5-figure student loan debt, going back home to mum and dad saying, I need to move back in because I can't afford to live. And the mum and dad look back at him and say, move back home? Kids today are so lazy and irresponsible. Your mother and I started out with nothing. And in reply, he says, trust me, I would have loved starting out with nothing. And he's starting out with a 5-figure debt. You need to understand that these baby boomer generations, the parents, if they earned the grades, they were given state-sponsored entry into universities in many countries to become the next class of educated people to provide the revolution into this new tech age that we're in. And I'm not sure how much these older generations actually understand the situation that the younger people are now presented with. They are being guided by their elders, who, if they actually fully understood the situation, would advise against these situations in the first place, because the poor guys that are leaving university now with huge debt are unable to get the jobs they need to get, because to get the jobs, you have to have the experience. And you can't get the experience without getting a job. And that's something that the mindset needs to understand. Even if you have your degree, even if you have 30, 40,000 that you think you're going to be able to pay off when you get your 30, 40,000 pound job, you're not going to be able to get that job because the job won't let you work there until you've got the 2-year experience. Just because you hold a piece of paper in your hand doesn't mean you know anything about that in the real world. The only way you learn is through physical, real experiences. You don't learn real-world applications from a classroom. Our society has been dumbed down and indoctrinated so bad, they assume every critical thinker is a conspiracy theorist. So here's a chart showing the mean starting salary for many graduates that leave university. And this is based upon UK pounds. Now, obviously, a lot of people go into the medicine and dentistry, and it's representing that your entry job that you get when you leave university after, I believe it's a 5-year course. So you're looking at 9 times 5, 45,000 in student loan debts, plus any other associated living costs that will be loaned to you. And you will be expected to be earning around the 27, 28,000 mark on your first year. And you can see how the rest of the industries, especially at this end, English, sports science, people that are doing sort of PE and working in schools, are earning 16, 17,000. And that's after like a 3-4 year course at university, which leaves you with a £36,000 debt. Anyway, what I'm getting at here, as an internship, when you get your first jobs, you get paid nothing. You get paid peanuts, barely even enough to survive. And if a lot of these jobs are going to be based in capital cities, you're going to be paying huge amounts on rent, or sharing accommodation, on food, on transportation. It's almost not going to be worth your while working in these places because you'll have nothing left at the end of the day. So you're working purely for experience. So all that money just gets sucked out of your bank. I'm telling you that straight away. So you've got a huge amount of debt. You're working for nothing. You can barely survive. I'd literally call that poverty line. That's the reality of the situation when you leave university. Now, this next chart is showing the median salary after 3.5 years in work. Now, the doctorate and dentistry people will be rising to 40,000, while everything else is still remaining around the 30,000, 25, 30,000 mark, which I will go on to show in another article shortly how much of that has to actually be paid back to student loans in the UK. And here we have the assumption chart based upon 47 years work, which is classed as a lifetime's work, for a UK adult, with the following level of indoctrination, quote, education. So we have the first and the 2-1 degree. The average salary per annum, 36,000. We'll call it 37. His average earning potential during his lifetime for 47 years work will be 1.7 million. The 2-2, the third degree. Average wage per year, 26,300. And the average wage for a non-degree worker is 25,000. So you can actually see, just by looking at this chart, the average difference between a non-degree worker and a degree worker is anything between 100 and 600,000 over the lifetime. But what you're not taking into account here is what is now being introduced with the debt. So you've got guys coming out with between 30 and 70,000 in debt. And you need to understand what I briefly touched on earlier, which is compound interest. I'm moving on to this next chart. And this is what I find so true. It's a learning pyramid. Passive learning and active learning. And a lot of this in the top tier section is regarding what you will receive in university. Your lecture, and people spend hours at lectures at university, represents 5% of your average retention. So you almost absorb nothing from a lecture. You only get 10% from reading, 20% from an audio visual, seeing it on a computer screen, demonstration, which is practical applications in a science lab or whatever the area may be. And then you break it down into the active learning, which is a discussion group, which is sitting down with your peers in an educational environment and discussing the key core topics that it is that you're trying to learn about. 50% is retained information from a group discussion. And here it becomes interesting because practice by doing, 75% you retain by physically doing something. So if you want to become good at football and learn about it, you have to kick that football and play with that football. You can't just read about it in a book. You have to physically kick and interact in the environment where that ball moves. And 90% teach others immediate use. And the way that I think of this system is you'll have a huge amount of people going through the mainstream educational system for qualifications of a piece of paper, which when you get into the real world mean absolutely fuck all. Because if you haven't got experience, a piece of paper is just a piece of paper to get you through the door. But if you've got no real world application, your worth is almost worthless, because there's so many people with degrees fighting for those same jobs. And that's where it becomes a competition. If you're not the best of the best, with what normally helps is friends and family, influential people who can recommend you for a job. If you haven't got any of that, you generally don't stand a chance in getting somewhere. Now, on the flip side of that, with practical education, we're talking about plumbers, carpenters, mechanics, engineers, people that use their hands and their real knowledge and practical use. These guys have fundamental advantages because of the physical nature of the work. When you're becoming an apprentice in one of these fields, you are getting real experience at the same time as the education through the qualification at college or wherever it may be. Now, something here in the UK, we have these courses called NVQ, which is a national vocational qualification. And that is what a lot of apprenticeships use. And I'm a strong believer of this is your best route in today's society of education, because you will learn about real practical skills. You will get paid while you are in an apprenticeship. You will be being trained by people that have been doing these jobs for years, and you will learn hands-on experience. Now, the money is crap, much like the money is crap after you've got a degree anyway. But the difference is you don't carry that huge backpack of debt with you throughout your life. You should effectively be in a position to then move in a debt-free situation. And by the time you've finished the same amount of years that you would have spent in a university environment collecting that debt while learning these passive learning techniques, you would have spent and become a master at that trade, and then actually command the same amount of money as a 3 or 4 year graduated internship, earning 30 or 40,000 a year. The equivalent being you're earning the same amount, but you're not carrying that huge burden of debt which has a compounding interest rate. I'll leave it there and I'll move on to just these couple of articles. I won't read them all, but I'll just hit on some key points. Now this is Money Financial website, a UK website. My £39,000 debt will never get repaid. Debt time bomb for taxpayers, as 85% of students will never pay off loans. Now I know this is a bit of an old article, 2013, but I just want to show you one part which caught my eye. Clangston is a thorn in the side of the government. He has challenged it on wrong tax codes on 2 occasions. Research among his pupils confirmed widespread ignorance about the changes to the interest charges applied to student loans taken out of last summer. I asked 160 pupils what the new tuition fee cap was, and they all said £9,000 a year. But when I asked about the rate that would be applied to these loans, not one boy could tell them what it was. Clangston says a student on a 3-year course with a tuition fee of £9,000 a year and getting a maintenance loan of £3,500 a year would leave £43,500 in debt. This is based on a rate of 6.3% RPI plus 3 points. After university, they start making repayments once their salary is over £21,000 a year. At present, repayments for someone on £21,000 are £34 a month. Interest continues to be applied to the debt, with the rate dependent on the size of earnings. The more they are paid, the higher the rate, subject to the maximum of RPI plus 3 points. Take, for example, someone starting on the average national wage of £26,600, assuming earnings growth throughout their career of RPI plus 2 points, and the £21,000 threshold increases in line with inflation. Clangston calculates they will never repay their loan. The £43,500 debt accumulated at university would escalate for 27 years, peaking at 78,500 before falling slightly to 76,800 at the end of 30 years. Under current rules, and that's the key point, okay, under current rules, the debt is then written off. So all student debt in the UK gets written off automatically after 30 years. Under current rules. Okay, so bear that in mind. So here we have a story, June 2016. Government under pressure over student loan change. Petition decision to freeze repayment threshold reaches 120,000 signatures. And if you're not aware, anything that gets 100,000 signatures in the UK on a petition has to be debated in Parliament or raised in Parliament for debate. Last week, there was a huge outcry after it emerged that students are seeing their debts rise by as much as £180 a month because of interest alone, with graduates charged 3.9% as the sum balloons. Many feel they have been duped and cheated. Students are so angry after the government backtracked on promises made in 2010 that the 21,000 earning threshold, at which point students are required to pay back loans, would rise annually with average earnings. So already they are backtracking and changing the rules. Okay, let's move on to this guy here. This is the moneysavingexpert.com, and it started out with this guy being used by a lot of people for fairly good information that he would put out. And then he started becoming extremely mainstream across a lot of the UK channels. I think it's BBC. And they'd use his advice. And he'd comment on anything money related in the UK and how to save people a few quid here and a few quid there. Anyway, my belief of this guy is that he is becoming more government controlled and in helping to push agendas. So he comes out in this article on his website. Student loans myth busting. The truth about fees, loans and grants for 2015-2016 starters. Straight away, ignore paper headlines about students leaving university with 50,000 debt. That's mostly meaningless figure. What counts is how much you'll repay. For some, that's far more. For others, it's free. So the whole point of this article is to make the potential and existing students and parents not worry about debt, because hey guys, we found a loophole in the system. Don't worry about it, okay? This guide by me is written to bust common myths about student loans, grants and finance, including the 20 key facts every potential student, parent and grandparent should know. Alright, so he starts off with what he's done. I don't really care about that. Don't confuse the cost and the price tag. The headline's shouting about 50,000 student debt and that getting bigger as living loans increase in 2016. It's safe to say many students and parents are scared about these huge sums and worry about how they'll ever repay it. But in essence, that fear is misplaced. Yeah, because debt's good. Debt's good for you. You know, there's good debt and bad debt. This is a good debt. And he goes on to say why. So, what you repay solely depends on what you earn after university. You don't need the cash to pay for university. It isn't a case of pay up or you can't go. Once your application has been processed, tuition fees are automatically paid by their student loans company, SLC. And there is a loan for living costs too. Oh, fantastic. They're all trying to help us, aren't they? Full-time students only need to start repaying these at the earliest in the April after they graduate or leave, no matter how long their course is. You repay 9% of everything earned above 21,000. Earn less and you don't repay. Except you do. Once you leave university, you only repay when you're earning above 1,750 a month, which is equivalent to 21,000 a year. And then it's fixed at 9% of everything you earn above that. So he breaks it down into figures here. If you earn 22,000 in the year that you graduate, what do you repay? The answer is £90. So he does another example. If you earn 31,000, the answer is 900 has to be repaid. And he goes on to say, how on earth will my child be able to afford to repay these debts if they get a poorly paying job? This panic question has been thrown at me by many parents, and it's all really important to examine. Someone on a low wage will be required to repay little or nothing at all. In fact, only higher earners will be shelling out large amounts. It's important to note that not repaying much because you're just over the threshold isn't being bad. The system is, in reality, a graduate contribution designed so that, in the main, those who gain the most financially out of the university contribute the most. The 21,000 threshold was supposed to rise in 2017, but now it won't. So here's the key part. Okay, after 30 years, any and all remaining debt is wiped. You stop owing either when you've cleared your debt or when 30 years from April after graduation have passed, whichever comes first. If you never get a job earning over the threshold, it means you won't have to pay a penny. It's one of the reasons those who are near retirement, who don't have a degree and want one, find it very appealing, as unless they've a huge pension, they know they will never have to repay. And let's just remember that previous article. Under current law, it doesn't take much for people to suddenly decide, you know what guys, revision, we need to change the situation regarding these repayments, and you know what, you actually do have to pay them back because we're having a bit of problems with liquidity in the country, and student debts actually account to a huge amount of money that we need to recover because of whatever. And under the terms and conditions of that contract that you actually signed, which I'm sure you all read, gives us the legal right to make amendments to any part of this repayment process if circumstances change. So you got people like this guy pumping out information that this debt is effectively free if you never earn it. If you never get over that threshold, if you keep your salaries low, if you just pile that debt on, get that university degree, don't worry, you'll never have to pay it back. It's free money. Come on, man. When have you ever had and heard about free money? There's no such thing. You think these people that loan out huge amounts of fiat currency just give you something for nothing? Get a grip, come on. It doesn't work like that. Under current rules. It doesn't take much to change current rules. Let's move on to this SLC, the Student Loans Company, which I presume, and if you haven't guessed already, I do not hold a degree, is where all students go to get funding if they're not from wealthy backgrounds. And it does in fact confirm on this site that your debts get wiped after 30 years, or if you're deceased, or if you become disabled and you can't work, or when you become basically 65, which I believe is the retirement age. But as we all know, the retirement age is increasing and increasing and increasing, and by the time the 30-year-olds become 65, your retirement isn't going to be 65. Your retirement is going to be, you're going to be dead before you're allowed to have government retirements. So that law will definitely change, and this debt burden will actually continue to be upon you, in my belief, for the duration of your life. So do not believe people telling you student debt is free. Now, there was something I read, I think it was in this article, but I've lost its place, actually written inside the law of these agreements. It might have been this article. It was something about parent having extreme difficulties trying to pay off a student loan for their child. They had $25,000 in cash ready to settle it all. But the company, which is this company, SLC, make it extremely difficult for parents to, just basically for the contract to be null and void. And apparently even if you pay back the balance in full, the account is never fully closed. It's just represented with a nil balance due on that customer. But what actually is also written in the contract of this agreement is these debts can be passed down from generation to generation. So if you think that you can get to 65 and this debt will be wiped, well, as I've already covered, that will not be the case. And when you die, your university degree debt will be passed on to your children if you have children. And your home that you may have attained or inherited from your parents will have to be paid off on transfer of that debt. Now, as we know, when a parent dies and they leave an asset over a certain amount of value, the government will take a huge percentage of that in tax. And they will double tax you with their university degree that your parent had that they never paid off. All a fantastic ploy to keep further generations poor and more impoverished. That's my take on this whole system. And I wanted to cover that because I've had a few comments put out to me. And if you've got this far, congratulations. Thank you very much for watching. But I want to say this very clearly. I have not been all the way through an education system to university degree. I got out very early from school and took on a practical knowledge in one of the fields that I've previously discussed. And when I get comments from people telling me that I'm not educated because I may have various forms of grammatical errors in my videos, in my writing, in my reading ability, I can tell you I don't have a single penny of debt, and I bet many people watching this video do. So who is educated in that scenario? Debt is not a good thing to acquire, and it will come back and affect many people in the near future for not understanding the fundamental system that it is that people are blinded to today. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you just want to thank me for this video, please leave a comment. If you haven't subscribed, please do, because on this channel I share information about a wide, diverse range of topics that are all designed to help you and to educate you in a different form from the mainstream mode of thinking. And it's entirely up to you whether you decide to take some of this on board. But as I say with everything in life, listen to it all, don't believe everything, and conclude what you feel makes sense. Thanks for watching.